So we just looked at Robert Nozick, who represents very conservative economic sense of social justice. We will now look at a contrary view, John Rawls, who represents a concept of social justice that's more aligned with modern day progressivism. Um, John Rawls argues that in order to understand social justice, we must backtrack to what he calls an original agreement. And here's a quote from Rawls that I'll post in the module. But this original agreement includes the principles that free and rational persons concerned to further their own interests would accept in an initial position of equality as defining the fundamental terms of their association. These principles are to regulate all further agreements. They specify the kinds of social cooperation that can be entered into and the forms of government that can be established. This way of regarding the principles of justice I shall call justice as fairness. So we see right away that for Rawls, people are self-interested. So they're going to pursue their own self-interest. But in order to determine how a government should be established and how resources should be distributed, we need to backtrack to an original position of equality. Right now, we are all born into families of all varying income classes, and we also are unequal in so many ways, including in intelligence, in our capabilities to do this or that. Racial discrimination has some people set back in ways that others are not. That's why we get these ideas of privilege, for certain groups. There's all sorts of roadblocks in the way of certain people that we can't really say that we're all born in an equal position. But it's from a point of equality that we need to determine what justice entails and what a fair economic and governmental system requires. So, interesting to Rawls' argument is that the terms of social justice are not decided in isolation, like one philosopher sitting in a chair and thinking really hard about it. They happen in groups, so there needs to be group agreement about what is the just way of organizing ourselves and distributing resources. So a group decides, but all members of that group need to be in a point of equality. Okay, so John Rawls offers his own thought experiment called the veil of ignorance, and it's from within the veil of ignorance that we, as a group, can determine what we ought to do, or what a just state would look like. Okay, so this is a theoretical position, but when you're behind the veil of ignorance, you're supposed to imagine yourself unknowing of anything specific about yourself. Okay, so under the veil of ignorance, you don't know what your IQ is. Okay, your IQ. You don't know your sex. You don't know your race. You don't know your income level. Okay, of your family, for instance. You don't know what kind of cognitive style you'll have. So you don't know anything about your psychological capabilities. You don't know if you'll have a mental disorder or not, or if you'll have a healthy mental state. Okay, so you don't know really anything about yourself, and so what you want to do is you want to gather in a group, and you're all from this point of ignorance about yourselves, and you want to determine what principles ought to govern you. And because we're all self-interested, each person will ensure that regardless of how they come out of this veil of ignorance, they won't be facing, terrible hurdles, in order to live a decent life. Okay, so they will choose the less risky options for themselves. Oh, another thing I want to put in here is you don't know anything about your health. I referred to mental health there, but also your physical health. You don't know if you're handicapped, for instance. Okay, so you want to establish principles that will not overly burden you, however you come out of it. Now, this will exclude the possibility of communism as it's been realized in our world, because communism levels people. Your career is decided for you, and you will never make more than the person next to you. You have a set income, which just has your basic needs met, for instance. So you would never want that, because say you come out of here with an incredibly high IQ and your cognitive state is one where you're very innovative, and there's a good chance you'll be a business owner, and you'll want the opportunity to benefit personally from that. So you wouldn't agree to any principles that would level you, that would stop you from achieving more than someone else. Okay, so Rawls is not arguing here for a state of total equanimity, in terms of income and so on. He thinks that you would potentially overburden yourself if you did that, because you want to be able to make more than someone who is focusing in another direction, or doesn't have your talents or skills or drive. Okay, so we wouldn't be all communists here, but at the same time, we would want certain protections provided to us, so that say we come out and we have terrible health. Okay, well, just ask yourself this: if you had no idea what the status of your health would be, or what income level you would be in, would a universal healthcare system be a safe bet or an overly risky one? Okay, universal healthcare systems cost a lot, so they have to be funded through taxes. So if you came out of here and you had good health, and you had a high income level, and you had all sorts of great education and a lot of drive, and you ended up in a high paying job, yes, you would pay more taxes than maybe you would like. But still, from a state of ignorance, would it be more risky to be a high income earner who pays more taxes, or more risky to be a low income earner with poor health who doesn't have access to health care insurance because you can't afford it? It seems like the greater risk would be in not having a healthcare system that would provide for all. So John Rawls, he would challenge you to imagine yourself in this group. Could the group agree on a system that didn't have guaranteed health care, publicly funded for all? Would that really represent such a risk for people that they wouldn't be willing to do it? I think that it's hard to make the case that from the veil of ignorance, you wouldn't support a universal healthcare system. Also, of course, you would want laws that prevented discrimination because you didn't know what race you came out as. So you would want laws that protected people of all races. That would be an important platform for you from within the veil of ignorance. You'd also want something like, a lot of things that the U.S. already has, like protections for people with disabilities, because should you come out there with a disability, you wouldn't want to be overly burdened. John Rawls' theory provides a philosophical foundation and argument for those kinds of programs and protections. So a key thing to think about when thinking about John Rawls and his view of justice as fairness is what is overly risky to you and what is not overly risky to you when deciding on the principles of justice from within the veil of ignorance.